Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Emily Ferrier, here to bring you some uplifting stories in these trying times. For our first segment today, since Nashville is notorious for being one of the most beloved musical capitals of the U.S., Gibson Guitars is providing a special kind of relief for musicians who may have lost their instruments during this week's series of devastating tornadoes. Gibson Gives, the international guitar brand charitable foundation, is offering to replace any guitars that may have been lost or damaged during the storms. Our goal is to get the guitar back into the hands of anyone who had their guitar damaged or destroyed in the recent Tennessee storm. Says Dundee Jarrett, Executive Director of Gibson Gives. As a Nashville, Tennessee-based company, we're also engaging with artists and any other partners to provide support across many areas. The foundation has collectively donated more than $30 million worth of goods and services since their launch in 2002. In addition to installing music rooms in Nashville high schools, they've donated guitars and supplies to music therapy programs for veterans suffering from PTSD. Musicians looking to replace their guitars through the Gibson Gives recovery plan can email proof of loss or damage to donation request at Gibson.com. Replacement guitars may be prototypes or refurbished guitars that will be selected at Gibson's discretion. Pop superstar Taylor Swift, who is a Nashville native, is also contributing to the tornado relief. By asking her millions of fans to donate to the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee's Tornado Relief Fund. Although Swift did not disclose her Instagram followers exactly how much money she herself had contributed, her publicist confirmed she donated $1 million. With more than 12 million followers from Instagram, actress Kristen Bell has also been using her celebrity status to help with a charitable cause, but this time is for teachers in need. Every week for the last 6 months, Belle has been sharing a teacher's story on Instagram for a project she calls Future Teacher Friday. It's featured Teacher Friday. Brooke emailed me to nominate her friend of 25 years, Emily. She told me that when they set up Emily's classroom this year, she had little beyond tables and chairs brought the rest of her supplies herself. So let's send Emily some love and support. A little about her. I'm a first-year kindergarten teacher at a small title school in Genesee County, Flint, Michigan. Being a Title I school meant that majority of our students were below the federal poverty line. Some of our families struggle to have their basic needs met. Although some students reside in the city of Flint, our school is located in the neighboring town. They ride a bus to school, with their earliest pickup being 5:58 a.m. and the last stop being close to 5:30 p.m. These amazing kids spend the majority of their waking hours at school or traveling to and from. And this is just one of the many reasons it's so important to make my classroom feel like a home away from home for my students. We call our classroom house, and we're all a family. Our rules and routines are centered around being good to each other and supporting each other the way that a family should. Our mission at Woodland Park Academy is to create relationships to change the world. For me, fostering these relationships means giving 100 hugs a day, checking in with older students on my lunch, and telling students every day that I love them, and listening when they have something to say. It means never losing sight of how even the smallest act of kindness or understanding may change someone's life. Our school is small, and our teachers have some of the lowest paid salaries in the area. Being a first-year teacher in an almost empty classroom has been challenging. However, every day we try to fill our classroom with curiosity, excitement, and love. Please know that any donations received will directly impact the lives of my little learners. I'm forever grateful for the support. For every one of the posts, Belle highlights a teacher's need for school supplies and asks her followers to help out. Her call to action has proven extremely effective. One elementary school teacher from Belmont, North Carolina, was overcome with packages after she was featured on Belle's Instagram. I received a couple 100 items so far. They're still trickling in every day, Riggs told WCNC reporters that week. I even got a gift from the UK and Zimbabwe. More recently, Belle featured a first grade teacher from Flint on her Instagram, the one that I've just read to you. And she's also, since that Instagram post, been flooded by gifts and supplies from her Amazon wish list. The generosity of others is overwhelming, wrote the school on Facebook. Gratitude is the quality of feeling and experiencing thankfulness and appreciation. We're beyond thankful and appreciative for Kristen Bell and her hashtag Featured Teacher Friday for their outpouring of love, support, and dedication by enriching and changing the lives of our students through their generous donations. If you want to nominate yourself or a teacher to be featured on Belle's Instagram, you can send an email to featuredteacherfriday@gmail.com, or you may be inspired to help a teacher who's not been featured. Go to the Donors Choose and surprise an educator with a donation at the nonprofit's website. These generous things happening by celebrities to help the lives of the tornado victims, as well as the Gibson store and Kristen Bell's initiative, just show how generous and wonderful Americans can be. No matter what their celebrity status, no matter what their particular business, they're all willing to help America succeed. And obviously, in the case of Kristen Bell, by helping teachers, we're helping the future of America thrive. So kudos to them. That's an absolutely incredible feat. And we are thrilled to hear about the generosity happening in America. When we come back, we're also going to be talking about the generosity of Americans. This one in a slightly different way, because we're going to be talking about someone who could have been taking something just for herself and ignoring anyone else because she, quote unquote, more earned it in her own right, but instead gave gave up what she won to make somebody else's life better. So we're going to talk about that when we return from our break. So stay tuned.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. When we left off, we were talking about generosity, and we're going to continue on that track. While it's a common belief that money can't buy happiness, Rachel Lapierre is proving us otherwise by giving all of her money away. The 56-year-old former beauty queen from Quebec won the Gagnon Lifetime Lottery in 2013, which means she receives $1,000 stipend every week, and she's going to keep receiving those payments for the rest of her life. Instead of spending her fortune on lavish processions, which would be intriguing for any of us, really, Lapierre uses all of her money on running a charity helping the less fortunate. Money is money. When you're born and you don't have anything, Lapierre told the BBC, and when you go with nothing but your memories. You go by what you did here in life. Fame and money is not strange to Lapierre either. As a young woman, Lapierre attended modeling school so she could enter Miss Quebec in 1982 at the age of 21, where she won the pageant and toured the country. When she left her modeling lifestyle behind her, she started volunteering with a humanitarian organization and then working as a nurse so she could fulfill her desire to help people. Then, when she drew her winning numbers, she used the money to start her charity, Le Bouc Humanitaire. Though the organization accepts donations, much of the funding has come out of Lapierre's wallet. We try to promote good deeds. Good deeds can be many things. It can be a bike. It can be food. It can be transport, just to go to the hospital. It can even be listening to somebody on the phone because they're lonely, Lapierre said. I think happiness comes from the heart. It's nice to have a new home or car. It can be really fun, but you don't need that to be happy, she said. Another lovely piece of news on that note, Tayeb Soumani is a good man who will go back to the grocery store just so he can return some expensive orange juice for his wife. And because of that, he was rewarded $183 million. Soumani is a U.S. citizen who's lived in New Jersey since the 90s. Up until last month, he's been working as an accountant for a food company. His wife asked him to return some orange juice because it wasn't on sale. While he was at the store, he bought 2 Powerball tickets. The father of 2 told news reporters about the fateful string of events that led to his multi-million-dollar payout. I love orange juice now, he said, laughing. And one more little story of good fortune in improving a life. 6 years ago, Loren Kreutzer was living in a shack and scraping by on his $200 disability checks from a car accident in 2007 that cost him his leg and left him out of work when he saw a television segment that would change his life. The native of Leona Valley, California, was watching an episode of Antique Roadshow when he saw a rare Navajo blanket that was worth $500,000. Kreitzer was shocked because he happened to own one of these blankets that looked identical to the one on TV. According to Kreitzer, the blanket had been passed down through his family from generation to generation since his great-grandfather got it in the 1800s. After his grandmother passed away, his mother and sister had pillaged the entire house and left nothing except for a dirty blanket. Upon seeing the auctioneer's episode, Kreitzer took several antique organizations, only took the blanket to several organizations only to be turned down. Despite the rejection, the determined amputee took the blanket to John Morin Auctioneers in 2011 and found out that he struck gold. Morin and his team told Kreitzer that the blanket was worth at least $150,000. When Kreitzer agreed to put up the blanket for auction, he prayed for at least enough money to get a better house. After a 77-second bidding war, a ferocious bidding war that pushed the blanket's closing price to $1.5 million, which is the most expensive item the Morin auctioneers have ever sold. After taxes and fees, Kreitzer was given $1.3 million. They had to bring it over water and stuff to make me wipe sweat off my head, Kreitzer told CNBC. I started hyperventilating because I couldn't believe it. Everything just went limp. I couldn't catch my breath. It was hard to grasp. I mean, I worked hard my whole life. I was in construction. I never bought anything. I never saved. I always rented. I bought used cars because that's all I could afford. I've lived paycheck to paycheck my whole life, he added. So, what does such a thrifty man end up doing with such a large amount of money? He invested in some stocks, bought a house in California, finally married his longtime girlfriend, who has stuck with him throughout thick and thin. And he bought himself a nice car. To this day, he still credits the dirty old blanket that sat in his closet and saved his life. So sometimes generosity means giving to other people, and sometimes it also means allowing yourself to treat yourself the way that you would treat others. So I really liked that story of him finally not having to live paycheck to paycheck and getting to enjoy some of the hard work that he's been doing for ages. I really quite liked that. That story was very sweet for me. So I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. In Florida, this program is pairing abused... Oh, sorry, this is when we come back, because I realized that we need to take a break. So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk quite a few stories, actually, about some inmate programs in America that are making inmates a lot happier and fulfilling their lives and helping them re-enter society in a happy and healthy way. So we're going to talk about all of those stories when we return from our break. So don't go anywhere.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back. When we left off, we were talking about some incredible lottery winning stories, or good fortune stories. And when we now that we've returned, in Florida, a program is pairing abused dogs with incarcerated men, and is hoping and a promising future for both. I loved hearing about this story. I think it's really sweet and reminds us that we all have something in common. We all love animals. The Tales, or Teaching Animals and Inmate Life Skills program, focuses their rehabilitation efforts on dogs plagued by abusive backgrounds, since their behavioral issues keep pups from being adopted, and they're at risk of euthanization if they're not properly trained. Each dog is cared for by 2 inmates, one trainer and 1 handler. The inmates are responsible for engaging the dogs with training exercises, play, and of course, plenty of affection. The program lasts 2 to 3 months and is recognized by the Association of Professional Dog Trainers, which offers inmates considerable work-related experience. What's perhaps even more significant is the qualifications that the inmates receive from the program, is the sensation of feeling like they made a difference in the dogs' lives. Similarly to the dogs they train, these prisoners have seldom known the luxury of a supportive environment. And for many, the relationships they form with the dog is the first to offer them empathy, affection, and love. The unconditional love and affection that dogs seem to have for humans from all walks of life. Adam Goldberg, a photographer who recently granted permission to observe and photograph the training process inside the prison, said seeing the inmates living in their living quarters with rescue dogs was an amazing experience. The dogs were so well cared for and attentive to their inmate handler and trainer. Over the course of the last 3 years, Tales has saved 500 dogs with their unique training method. They're continuing to seek out new rescues who can have a positive impact on their human counterparts. It was very evident that dogs rely on inmates just as much as the inmates rely on the dogs, Goldberg added. Another story. Not only are these 2 former inmates helping to fight forest fires since gaining their freedom, they're also proving to their peers that there is a life after prison. Prison, of course, is supposed to be a correctional facility, so if there isn't a potential for the future, there is no point, really. During their time at Central New Mexico Correctional Facility, Lawrence Jaramillo and Joshua Melendrez were just two of the inmates who participated in a state-run program that teaches inmates about firefighting and prevention. The program, which taught the men life skills that they could use to reintegrate into society upon their release, often placed the men on the front lines of wildfire response teams in New Mexico. The experience was profoundly moving for Melendrez and Jamirlo, as they would often dream of starting a business together once they were released. So when they were finally freed from the correctional facility, they launched their own forestry campaign. Since they got a business license to operate all around forestry in November 2019, the dynamic duo has hired a crew of former inmates to join their company. There is life after prison, and that's what I want them to know from this. Furthermore, their company has provided much-needed backup support to state fighters battling blazes across the land of enchantment. And one more prison success story in a win-win for the public. These New York prisoners proudly earned their college degrees while behind bars. While they were still behind bars, they were part of the latest graduating class consisting of inmates who got their diplomas through Hudson Link, a nonprofit degree granting program dedicated to providing prisoners with college education so that they're less likely to reoffend upon release. According to the Hudson Link, the general rate of another crime, according to the Hudson Link, is 43%, while prisoners who walk out with degrees only have a 2% chance of being reincarnated. The organization argues that it costs a whopping $60,000 per year to jail an individual in New York State, but only $5,000 to provide them with a prison education. So it is actually cheaper in the long run if they're not reoffending. The Hudson Link is capable of offering degree programs for free, thanks to the private donations and sponsorships. The organization currently operates out of 5 different New York prisons, including the Sing Song Correctional Facility, where this emotional graduation ceremony took place last month. To date, Hudson Link has awarded 700 degrees to inmates. An additional 600 students in a state prison are currently enrolled in the program. The organization was founded by Sean Picca, who served his own prison sentence in 1998. Upon release, after completing a reduced sentence of 16 years, Picca began trailblazing work with the hopes of offering other inmates a second chance beyond the prison walls. I think a lot of prisons in this country were built in an effort of punishment. But when you punish somebody, there's got to be something about rehabilitation and second chances. And that's what we're doing in these prisons. Education is so important for the world. And a lot of people with lower income who statistically are much more likely to end up in prison they don't have access to it. So these prisons giving access to education for people with lower incomes is absolutely incredible. So when we come back from the break, another very interesting educational story, this time about languages. when we return from our break.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. When we left off, we were talking about some really incredible things happening in U.S. prisons to ensure a better reentry into society. And now, out of the 7,000 languages that are spoken around the world, 500 of them are at risk of being forgotten and lost to history. Thankfully, Daniel Boger Udell has created an online library to preserve them all. Udell is the co-founder of WikiTongues, a nonprofit dedicated to saving the world's endangered languages from extinction. More than 1,000 international volunteers contribute to the WikiTongue language library by interviewing people in their native languages. According to their website, we're living amid a renaissance of linguistic and cultural diversity, from the revival of minority languages in Europe to the resurrection of indigenous American cuisine. People around the world are pushing back against centuries of forced assimilation and reclaiming their cultural sovereignty. For the first time, our global community is breathing. At the turn of the 21st century, as many as half of the languages were in danger of disappearing. A canary in a coal mine of humanity, whether in Canada, where Native children were sent to boarding schools and punished for speaking their mother tongues, or in the United Kingdom, where school children were flogged for speaking Welsh, cultures from around the world were stolen, our languages beaten out of us. But the tide is turning. Thanks to a groundswell of activism, national governments are rolling back policies of forced assimilation. In 2003, Mexico repealed a constitutional ban on the use of indigenous languages in public schools. In 2014, the U.S. state of Alaska made all native languages co-official with English. Across Europe and elsewhere, Ghana and Vanuatu, minority languages are being incorporated into public school curriculums. Where governments fail to act, people are taking matters into their own hands. Perhaps the greatest misconception about cultural diversity is that the internet has a ruinous effect, swallowing up some smaller cultures in a torrent of English, Spanish, and other mass media languages. However, the internet has equipped people with the possibility of sustaining their mother tongues. The ability to create and share media makes it possible to promote your language without external support. Social media is a powerful tool for using your language on a daily basis. Even if you can't expect to use restaurants, shops, or government institutions. In fact, whether it's the Nuat languages of El Salvador, Cornish of England, the Norman language of France, the Tainua language of Southeast Asia, mother tongues once marginalized are being revived on Facebook, Twitter, and other platforms through the use of memes, private groups, and smart cord recorded videos. Around the world, people from hundreds of cultures are finding ways to amplify their voices, defy the assumption that globalization can be inclusive. However, access to methods of language remain unequal. While some communities have the privilege of working with trained linguistics, others speak languages that remain understudied. While some people are deft at promoting their languages online, others struggle with social media. Some have robust internet. Others are blocked by poor connectivity. Wikitongues exists to bridge these gaps. We're the front door to a wider process, a network of language champions from more than 70 countries. Saving a language takes a lifetime. We're here to ensure that people have access to their cultural sovereignty. We invite you to join us. So they get their information from interviews, and some of the participants in the interview have used their mother tongue to talk about their culture and language. Others simply use the video interviews to talk about themselves, regardless of the topics. The video interviews are cataloged and documented through the Wikitongue website. What a great big story. Interviewed Udell back in April of last year. The organization's volunteers had recorded 435 languages from 70 countries. And the number is increasing every day. So why is preserving language so important? Linguists cannot say with certainty how many human languages are spoken today. One linguist's language may be another's dialect. For instance, some classify languages of Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish as dialects of Scandinavian language because they share structures, vocabulary, and cultural experiences. Others claim that they are mutually comprehensible. On the other hand, others classify the 8 dialects of Chinese in distinct languages because, for example, Cantonese, Shanghainese, and Mandarin do not share vocabulary and are mutually incomprehensible, even though they share common orthography. Thus, linguists speculate that there are as few as 5,000 and as many as 9,000 languages. What's not in question, however, is that a number of languages is decreasing rapidly. Languages like species may be characterized as endangered, and they go extinct when the last speaker of the language dies. Why do these extinctions matter? When we lose a language, we lose a worldview, culture, and knowledge of the people who spoke it, constituting a loss to all humanity. Simply put, when students have access to these languages from a liberal arts education, they have a better chance of becoming citizens of the world, making a richer, more diverse, and harmonious culture amongst us all. I love these arguments for preserving language. I think languages are absolutely beautiful. And we're going to be sort of continuing with languages when we return from the break, in a way. Well, not quite. There's someone I'll introduce it when we come back from the break because we don't quite have time to get into it right now. So I hope you enjoyed this little segment on languages and the importance of preserving them. And I want you to think about that because when we come back from the break, we've got a new segment to talk about. So stay with us, enjoy the break, and I'll talk to you when you return.
Pets bring such joy to our lives, and the GSMC Pets podcast is here to share in that joy. We'll tell stories of pets finding their forever homes, acting in unexpected ways, being helpful, or just being silly. Whether you love dogs, cats, llamas, reptiles, fish, or you've never met an animal you didn't like, the GSMC Pets podcast is for you.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the importance of preserving languages. And now, J.R.R. Tolkien, a linguistics professor and someone who created 5 different languages for his own works, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, was a linguist extraordinaire, and he understood probably more than anyone the importance of preserving languages. And this story is about an avid animal lover who shares her home with 90 different rescue pets, and almost all of them are named after Lord of the Rings characters. Audrey Rochelle's massive menagerie includes Bilbo Baggins, the mule, Gandalf the goat, Frodo the spaniel, and 2 cats named Boromir and Faramir. But the 31-year-old dog sitter from Atlanta, Georgia, recently admits that she's running out of Middle-earth names. I've always loved animals. I don't think anyone is surprised that I'm living like this. When I was a kid, my room was full of stuffed animals because I couldn't get the real ones. They do all have names, and 80% of them are named after Lord of the Rings, said the Tolkien fan. I'm a little obsessed with the books and films. I agree with you, darling. Technically, we haven't run out of Lord of the Rings names yet, but I really have to search for them now. Rochelle keeps 22 rescue pigs, 12 dogs, 8 chickens, 6 cats, 4 parrots, 4 horses, 4 peacocks, 4 rats, 3 hairless guinea pigs, 2 goats, 2 ducks, 2 cockatoos, 2 cows, 2 mini cows, 2 alpacas, 2 ferrets, 2 geckos, 1 tegu lizard, 1 bearded dragon lizard, a mule, a hamster, a ratus, a tortoise, and a python. That sounded like the summer version of the 12 Days of Christmas. She's constructed a special 10-foot wide bed so that at least 4 of her animals can pile in with her at night. Without fail, the pigs will join me in bed, and usually the dogs and cats will come as well. I've set up tree branches and the headboard so the birds can sleep near me, and I've taken naps with the rats before as well. Even though I built a bigger bed, they still all sleep on top of me. Rochelle moved into the farmhouse back in 2015, so she can use the extra space to accommodate her pets. Her critter companions cost her about $10,000 a year in veterinary bills and food, including frozen mites for her snakes and roaches, crickets and superworms for the reptiles. She has her feeding routine down to 40 minutes a day, and cleaning cages and enclosure takes another half an hour. I like to make sure everyone is settled in, and I'll feed the dogs their breakfast. And I'll feed myself if I'm lucky. I give the rest of the animals breakfast at around 10. Fresh foods, vegetables, hay and pellets for horses, and the pigs get bananas. I can go through and spot clean all the cages and enclosures in half an hour. She'll put a podcast on to do it. Maybe she'll put one of these on. She's also spent another $10,000 on her animal proofing 11,000 square foot guest house where pigs, birds, and guinea pigs could live inside. The birds like to chew everything, so we took out all the molding, baseboards, and carpets, and child-proofed all the cabinets. Now they can fly free and not be locked in cages. She even rigged her home with cameras so that she could always keep an eye on her beloved animals when she's not home. She credits her parents, Larry Jacobs, a retired natural resources specialist, and Cynthia Shelby, retired nurse, for her animal-loving nature. My dad would go out and count endangered species like bald eagles, frogs, and snakes. My mom was constantly talking about stray animals like baby birds, kittens, and dogs. We raised chickens, rabbits, and ducks. Growing up, I had probably about 20 animals. I'd always been that way. 10 years ago, she started taking in rescue pigs, and her menagerie grew from there. Her family sometimes wishes that she would focus on herself instead of her many pets. But Rochelle said, "There's nothing I'd rather be doing with my time or money than looking after animals." I ended up with all these animals because people had taken them in and then didn't want them. A lot of them arrived in terrible conditions. People say I'm an animal hoarder, but there are people who have failed at having just one animal. Here I am with other people's animals all around me, and I'm doing a good job. Though she adores her zoological lifestyle, she admitted it's not for everyone. I think a normal person, this would be a lot of work. A lot of noise, a lot of cleaning, but for me, it's almost therapeutic. I get so much satisfaction from caring for my animals. Out of 90, only 5 of them weren't adopted. I'm able to provide unwanted animals a home. This is my little piece of paradise. In addition to sharing her animal-loving life on YouTube as Adri Rochelle, she's applying for nonprofit status with the hopes of turning her home into a sanctuary so she can take on even more animals. Another short story about animals. A man from Utah has been protecting stray cats from the cold by recycling old coolers into makeshift shelters. Philip Rojic first began his labor of love back in November as a means of providing extra comfort to feral felines around his home in Oakton. They're living creatures. To me, living creatures deserve to have their basic needs met. I'm giving them a second chance, one way or another. Using a 6-inch drill bit, he crafts each cat cooler, as he calls them, by cutting out a hole in each side of the cooler. Once he lines the holes with strips of pipe and insulated foam, he fills the cooler with straw for bedding. This week, he managed to place 150 cat coolers around Riverdale and Oakton before he was forced to put his passion project on hold in order to move houses. Not only that, dozens of social media users have started crafting similar shelters in their own hometowns since he posted pictures of his cat coolers to his charity's Facebook page. These charitable things for animals are absolutely lovely and just shows, again, how generous Americans can be with their time and resources when it comes to helping people and animals less fortunate or in need. When we return from a break, today's history. The good news on today's history.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before our break, we were talking about the generosity of some pet owners / pet enthusiasts that were helping to save the less fortunate animals. And now that we've returned, sorry, my throat is so rough today. I am so sorry for your ears. Now that we've returned, we're going to talk about the good news in today's history. Now, the day I'm recording is March 7th, so we're going to be talking about the history on the day of March 7th. So be aware of that. 171 years ago today, the renowned American botanist and horticulture pioneer Luther Burbank, who developed more than 800 strains and varieties of plants, was born. He created the Shasta daisy, the delicious apple, and the russet potato, which invented to be resistant in the blight that wiped out the crop throughout Europe and caused the devastating Irish potato famine. For those of you that don't know a whole lot about the Irish potato famine, just a few quick things about it. This was in 1845 to 1849. Ireland was very dependent on the potato. So basically, the worst year was the 1847. During the famine, about 1 million people died, and 1 million people more had to emigrate away from Ireland, causing Ireland's population to fall between 20% and 25%. The potato blight, in which infected potato crops throughout Europe in the 1840s, caused about 100,000 deaths, and influenced unrest in the widespread European revolutions of 1848. Longer-term causes include the system of absentee landlordism and single-crop dependence. The famine was a watershed in the history of Ireland. From 1801 to 1922, was directly ruled by Westminster. The famine effects permanently changed Ireland's demographic, political, cultural landscape, and produced 2 million refugees, stirring the century-long population decline. So very important, these new discoveries. Burbank grew up on a farm and only received a high school education in Lancaster, Massachusetts. He used his inheritance to buy land and eventually move to Santa Rosa, California. He established a greenhouse, nursery, and experimental fields where he conducted crossbreeding experiments on plants. Inspired by Charles Darwin's The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication. Burbank became famous for his plant catalogs and satisfied customers who grew his Santa Rosa plums, faming gold nectarines, freestone peaches, the white blackberry, and more. The Santa Rosa property is now open to the public as a city park. The Luther Burbank Home Gardens. The town celebrated its 170th birthday in 2019 by planting a plum tree and 170 Shasta daisies. Some more good news on this day. Maurice Ravel, the noted French composer, was born in 1875 on today's date. In 1792, the great inventor John Friedrich William Herschel, who was a mathematician, astronomer, chemist, experimental photographer, who invented the blueprint, was born in the town of Slough, England. Explorer Roald Amundsen announced his discovery of the South Pole in 1912. The first 78 RPM jazz record was released by the original Dixieland Jazz Band for the Victor Talking Machine Company with an A-side Dixie Jazz Band One Step in 1917. The first successful transatlantic radio telephone conversation took place between New York City and London in 1926. Golda Meir was elected as the first Prime Minister of Israel in 1969. Sunil Gavaskar became the first cricket batsman to score 10,000 test runs in 1987 on today's date. The first democratically elected Palestinian parliament was formed in 1996 on today's date in history. A New Hampshire ceremony ratified Gene Robinson as the first openly gay Episcopal bishop in 2004. A mass assembly of the Kuwaits marched in support of voting rights for women outside of the government center in 2005, and Catherine Bigelow became the first female to win an Academy Award for Best Director for her film The Hurt Locker, which was also Best Picture, about a bomb disposal team during the Iraq War in 2010. And on this day in 1923, Robert Frost's poem, Stopping by Woods, It's One Snowy Evening, was published in the New York Republic, ending with the famous line, "And miles to go before I sleep." The poem was Frost's favorite and the one he called the best bid for remembrance. Frost said he wrote the verses based on a difficult Christmas that he experienced, when on December the 22nd, he realized he wouldn't be able to afford Christmas presents for his family. From Garrison Keller's The Writer's Almanac, Frost wasn't the most successful farmer, but he scrounged up some old produce from his farm, hitched a horse, and took a wagon in to try and sell enough produce to buy some gifts. He couldn't sell a single thing. And as evening came and it began to snow, he had to head home. And he was almost home when he became overwhelmed with the shame of telling his family about his failure, as if it sensed his mood. The horse stopped, and Frost cried. He said he bawled like a baby. Eventually, the horse jingled its bells, and Frost collected himself and headed back home to his family. His daughter Leslie agreed this was the inspiration for the poem. And she remembered the horse, whose name was Eunice, and her father told her, "A man has as much right to a woman as a good cry now and again. The snow gave me shelter. The horse understood everything and gave me the time. And miles to go before I sleep." And with that, we're done. So thank you for listening to the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Please remember to subscribe to the show and write us a nice review and rate the episode. That really, really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and we also have an Instagram page. So thank you so much for listening, and everyone have a great night, and I'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from social media news to marketing news, and even weird news, the GSMC Podcast Network has you covered. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast.